In part 2 of this poetry series, we are going to explore how to use myth and more challenging examples of versification to write a poem. This section is dedicated in particular to how poetic form can be a vessel to safely explore painful emotions or memories that are hard to revisit. Many writing students have the desire to write about experiences that are poignant, perhaps even so significant that it is hard to capture them. A lot of times there is also a fear of being flooded with emotions of grief, helplessness, despair, anger, or abandonment. So, we have this kind of tug-of-war inside of us. You want to write deeply and movingly to give your story the honor it deserves. But in practice, you are unable to manage it. I have 2 recommendations for writers who have a trauma that feels inexpressible. Draw on myth. Myths are stories that are at the furthest removed from the everyday and the ordinary. They embody truths about human nature and life without having to tell stories that follow the rules of what is probable. In the last video, we talked about the moon Europa, which orbits around Jupiter. Europa was one of the 4 original moons identified 400 years ago by the astronomer Galileo, along with Io, Ganymede, and Callisto. The thing that all these moons share in common is that they were named for Jupiter's unwilling lovers. If you read Ovid's Metamorphoses in its entirety, it paints a very unsettling portrait of how Romans in the 1st century regarded gods. They saw themselves not as beloved by their creators, but as their victims. Even when a god fell in love with a human, it usually ended in rape, abduction, or death. The story of Europa is of a young Phoenician princess who, while enjoying herself on the beach, meets a beautiful and affectionate white bull. In his shape-shifting disguise, Jupiter is a beautiful animal colored like snow. Here is the rest of the story. Though he was gentle, she trembled at first to touch him, but soon she approached him, adorning his muzzle with flowers. Then he rejoiced as a lover, and while he looked forward to hoped-for pleasures, he slobbered all over her hands and could hardly postpone the joys that remained. As her fear was little by little diminished, he offered his chest for her virgin hand to caress, and his horns to be decked with fresh flowers. The royal maiden, not knowing on whom she was sitting, was even so bold as also to climb on the back of the bull. Almost fainting with terror, she glanced back, as she was carried away, at the shore left behind. In a short but poignant seduction, Ovid captures Europa's emotional journey from fear to trust and then back to fear. Europa delights in caressing the majestic and alluring animal. The bull wins her trust, and shortly thereafter swims off to a foreign continent with her. Europa looks back in terror as she leaves all that she loves and plunges into the unknown on the back of a beast. This bull also happens to be the universe's most powerful god, the reigning deity of all creation. We witness her terror of being separated from everything she loves. We feel the betrayal. And there is still more if we plumb the depths of this story. We can use the myth of Europa as a frame and treasure trove of visual images and emotionscapes to tell our own stories. What is it like to be tricked into trusting someone? When our instinct tells us something is dangerous, but we cannot help ourselves and get lured in by someone's or something's charms or beauty. We can also look to this story as a way of exploring our spirituality. Do you feel you live in a hostile world, full of indifferent or cruel forces that have the power to shape your life for good or for ill? Or do you believe that there are benevolent beings looking after you? Do you feel that God spirits you on your journey in ways that can be hard but necessary? Or perhaps you want to explore the idea that under our experiences with nature, we are also interacting with divinity, which is speaking to us like Zeus through the bull in this story. On a human level, the story of Europa's seduction and abduction is a capsule of how trust and intimacy can be built and then suddenly broken when we fall in love. Everything that seemed real and safe turns out to be false and dangerous. When you have an intense love affair and are suddenly abandoned, you ascend ecstatic heights and then are dropped. When you have a romantic breakup, you might feel a bit like Europa, as if you were torn away from the world through your pain and isolation. You may feel an immense gap and distance between you and the friends that made you happy before, as if you have been transported to some terrifying and lonely place. In the last video, we saw how Ada Limon uses a simple tercet. She doesn't, however, use the rhyme scheme or meter of Dante's tercet. We won't focus on meter this time, but on rhyme.
Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita, mi ritrovai per una selva oscura, che la diritta via era smarrita.
Dante's tercet consists of a rhyming first and third verse of ita. The second verse introduces a different sound, the u-ra, which will be the rhyme ending of the first verse of the next stanza. Like the previous tercet, the sound of the first and third verses in this new tercet, u-ra, will rhyme. The odd verse introduces the new sound, orte. The Terza Rima gives us a continuous rhyme, while always braiding in a new strand. The tercet has a forward motion to it. Then when that odd sound of the second verse is braided into the following stanza as the first verse, it gives us that sense of amplification and continuity. This is all, of course, happening subconsciously through the same mechanisms by which we appreciate a musical composition. Use the Europa myth to explore, being tricked into trusting someone. What it is like to fall in love and then get abandoned. Sensing there is some divine force behind nature. The terror of being pulled into the unknown. Leaving friends and family behind. Use terza rima. Limit each verse to 10 or 11 syllables. Rhyme the first and third verses. The second verse should not rhyme with the first and third of the same stanza. The second verse should rhyme with the first and third verse of the following stanza.
Dr. Jeffrey Neal, and in the past 2 years I coached 3 of the New York Times Summer Reading Contest winners out of 20,000 submissions. 21 of my workshop scholars were runners-up for first prize or were awarded honorable mentions. My seminars are fun and inspirational, and here you can get some of the strategies for free that my award-winning students use.